what makes me really hopeful is that there are 26 human beings. There's lots more human beings, but 26 Humanities for Young People human beings that have been doing this work from all across the country over the last 10 days, and will be going home taking actions that you choose, that you see as important, and that you will be drawing in your friends and your peers and your teachers. So I was really glad that Lisa talked about how the Halifax School Board is now acknowledging the territory.
I just wanted to ask, if an Indigenous Studies course were to be taught in high school, do you think it should be incorporated with an overall Canadian history course or taught separately?
They do have Aboriginal or Indigenous studies in most of the high schools here in our school board, although they aren't necessarily taught by Indigenous people. It did start, a number of years ago. I like that it's a separate course so that the whole thing focuses on Indigenous, history, and current events as well. But I would like to see more of, the treaty education, which I'm hoping it will be soon, embedded within all subject matter. But I do like that it's an option for a history class in high school. Here anyway. Did you want to add? Yeah.
So this is an example of where we all have different perspectives, and that's good. So in my work with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and as the education lead at the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation, one of the things that I say encouraged because it sounds so much better than pushed, with ministries in every province and territory was the infusion, and not salt and pepper infusion, but context, to really have as a context in every subject area, Indigenous perspectives, Indigenous science. And so remember, because we're talking to all of you from all across the country, I use the term Indigenous, but remember that Indigenous isn't a culture. That's like saying you're white. That's not a culture. Are you German? Are you Polish? Are you Ukrainian? Are you English? Are you Scottish? So the territory, so substitute the names of the nations of the territories where you are. So for example, in Alberta, there's a curriculum rewrite happening right now in every grade from kindergarten to grade 12 in every subject area. They're starting with 6 subject areas to start with. And I think that when we think about from just more of a kind of a logistics, chronological, common sense perspective, it is impossible for anything to exist in this country that doesn't exist within the context of the First People. So if we're talking about approaches to science currently, and that doesn't mean there isn't great value to other sciences as well, but everything that exists in this country exists either because of the interference with Indigenous knowledge or in a combination with, so I mean really a lot of drugs and medications, if you trace that back, comes from plants that are identified and were used by Indigenous people long before, there was contact here in this particular case. Sort of European or Western or Eurocentric ideas of boundaries are very cut and dry. Look at the boundary between Canada and the United States. Tell the Nakota, the Lakota, the Dakota, the Haudenosaunee, all the people that live in that territory that there was actually a line there. It's artificial. So it helps to, even within that, understanding that territory from an Indigenous perspective is very different, depending on different parts of the year, different times, different uses. So if we did all of that well, then I think having a separate course that specifically can go in depth around culture, knowledge, learning would be excellent.
My question, I've been in a lot of classes where Indigenous issues have been brought up, but it's either insensitive or just really strangely inaccurate. So I was wondering how you would go about filling the need for Indigenous teachers and training non-Indigenous teachers to competently address those topics.
One of my degrees is actually an education, a teaching degree, and it's very hard to get into the school system here. And even though at the time when I was trying to go through it, there was no to my knowledge and from what I was told, there was no Indigenous teachers in our school board, and it still didn't help me to get out there and to be able to share my knowledge. But I do have a little story. When I was in high school, there was a teacher who made reference, and she said the term Eskimos. And I said, Miss, you know, that's not the correct term. That's not what that community, you know, wants to be called. You know, that's incorrect and whatnot. And then she turns to me, she goes, oh, and what do you people like to be called now? And that was one of those moments where you just kind of like, you put your head down, and it's just so embarrassing. And, you know, I remember my mom coming in, and she definitely gave her a piece of her mind. And, you know, I said, well, just call me Lisa. Like, I was just, you know, you're embarrassed, right, in front of your peers and whatnot. But we definitely need more First Nations teachers. And I think that we need to be teaching our own subjects and history, as well as other teachers getting the education to be able to properly teach and know what terms are acceptable to use and what they should be talking about, and kind of get away from those stereotypical things that, you know, we always seem to learn about, and, you know, just embed it into the education.
I was wondering, what have you done to reclaim your identification as Indigenous, and what would you suggest for Indigenous youth to do the same thing?
Well, for me specifically, I shared a little bit about, you know, feeling that shame as being young. And, you know, that stemmed from, of course, my grandmother having to hide. And then, you know, little by little kind of trickling back into it. And then within our education system, you know, people not knowing, the teachers weren't knowledgeable, the students weren't knowledgeable. But, you know, what helped me to reclaim my identity and to be proud of who I was is being around other, you know, Indigenous people my age and older, and seeing what they're doing, and seeing other people who are proud, and learning the culture. You know, I craft now. You know, we meet every week at our center, and we drum together, and we eat together, and we go on different powwow and Maui-Omi trips. So it's really embedding yourself into the culture, and being proud and passing that on, whether that means to your kids in the future or to your peers, you know, to older people, and speak to your elders, because they're so knowledgeable. They know so much. They may have lost their language, but they still have so much to teach you. We're trying to get our language back, and that's one of the things we do as well is, you know, we're trying to learn our language. And, you know, I've learned so many words and phrases over the years, and, you know, starting to understand it, but it's still a long way to go. But it's just that commitment to, you know, acceptance of who you are and what you're going to do with that, and to continue that learning, because we're all lifelong learners. So I don't know, I still have a long way to go.